There's a particular kind of courage that doesn't get talked about much in war. Not the kind you find in a trench with bullets flying overhead, but the quieter, more terrible kind. The kind where a man looks at a direct order from the most powerful and dangerous leader in the world, looks at the map on the table in front of him, and decides that the order is wrong. That the order, if followed, will kill every single man under his command. And then he picks up a pen and writes something else. That is the story we're talking about today. August 1944, the fields of Normandy. The war in the West is cracking open like a fault line, and somewhere in a farmhouse near the French town of Trun, a one-eyed SS general named Paul Hausser is staring at a map and making the most dangerous calculation of his life. Behind him, Berlin's orders to hold. In front of him, two Allied armies closing like a steel jaw around 50,000 German soldiers. This is the story of the Falaise Pocket, one of the most catastrophic German defeats of the entire Second World War.
And it is the story of a general who chose to disobey Adolf Hitler not once, but twice in his career, because the alternative was something worse than insubordination. The alternative was annihilation. Let's go back to the beginning. Who was Paul Hausser? To understand the decision Hausser made in August 1944, you have to understand who Paul Hausser was, because he was not a man who disobeyed orders lightly. He was, in many ways, one of the most disciplined soldiers Germany produced in the 20th century, a man who had been in uniform almost his entire life. Hausser was born in 1880 in Brandenburg on der Havel into a Prussian military family. His father was a major in the Imperial German Army, and young Paul entered the Army in 1892 at the age of 12, enrolling in the cadet school at Köslin. By 1899, he had graduated from the military academy in Berlin, was commissioned as a lieutenant, and began a career that would span more than half a century of German history.
He served in World War I on the Eastern Front, rose through the ranks of the post-war Reichswehr, the small, professional 100,000-man German army allowed under the Versailles Treaty, and retired in January 1932 with the rank of lieutenant general. Most men would have stopped there. Hausser was 51 years old. He had served his country honorably. He could have faded into the quiet life of a retired officer. Instead, he joined the SS. In 1934, he was transferred to the SS Verfügungstruppe, the armed SS formations that would eventually become the Waffen-SS. And within a year, he was running the officer training school at Braunschweig. He became the architect of the Waffen-SS as a fighting force. He created training programs, developed doctrine, built the institutional identity of what would become Germany's elite frontline military units. His men called him Papa Hausser. It was a name born of something genuine. The soldiers under his command felt that he was one of the rare commanders who actually thought about their survival, not just their utility as maneuver pieces on a map. He commanded the SS division Das Reich through France in 1940 and into the opening phases of Operation Barbarossa in the Soviet Union in 1941. In October of that year, he was seriously wounded. A Soviet shell fragment caught him in the face and destroyed his left eye. From that point forward, he wore the black eye patch that became something of his signature. He recovered, returned to command, and by early 1943 was leading the SS Panzer Corps, three of Germany's most elite divisions, on the brutally contested Eastern Front. And it was there, in February 1943, that Hausser did something that would have gotten virtually any other German general shot. Hitler had ordered Hausser's SS Panzer Corps to hold the city of Kharkov, the fourth largest city in the Soviet Union, a city of enormous symbolic and industrial importance, to the last man. The order came directly from the Führer's headquarters. It was unambiguous. Kharkov would be defended to the death. Hausser looked at the situation around him. Three Soviet armies were converging on his position. His corps was on the edge of encirclement. A second Stalingrad was forming in real time, and he could see it clearly from where he stood. On February 15, 1943, with his SS Panzer Corps nearly surrounded, Hausser ordered a breakout to the southwest. His immediate superior, General Hubert Lanz, was horrified. A direct Führer order was being deliberately disobeyed. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Lanz signaled Hausser, "Kharkov will be defended under all circumstances." Paul Hausser ignored disorder as well. The last German rearguard left Kharkov on the morning of February 16th. Hitler was furious. Then something unexpected happened. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, one of the greatest operational minds of the war, used the mobile SS divisions that Hausser had just saved to launch a stunning counterattack. By March 14, German forces, led by those same Waffen-SS divisions that would have been destroyed if they'd obeyed Hitler, had retaken Kharkov entirely. The city that Hausser had been ordered to die defending was back in German hands, and his corps was still intact to fight. The general had been vindicated, quietly, by results. Hausser did not escape entirely without consequence. His promotion to full Obergruppenführer was reportedly delayed, likely as a punishment for the disobedience. But he was an SS officer, a party member, a holder of the Knight's Cross. Hitler needed his competence more than he wanted to punish him. And so in 1944, when the Allies landed in Normandy and the situation in France began to deteriorate, Paul Hausser was still there, still wearing the eye patch, still thinking clearly, and about to face a decision far larger than Kharkov. Operation Lüttich and the making of a catastrophe. To understand how 50,000 German soldiers ended up trapped in a shrinking pocket of French countryside in August 1944, you have to understand a decision that was made several weeks earlier, and you have to understand who made it. After the Allied landings on June 6th, the Germans spent 6 brutal weeks trying to contain the beachhead. They fought in the terrible Norman bocage, the dense hedgerow country that broke up formations, negated Allied armor advantages, and turned every field boundary into a potential ambush. German resistance was fierce, organized, and costly for both sides, but it was not sustainable. The Americans had broken through at Saint-Lô at the end of July in Operation Cobra, a massive assault preceded by carpet bombing that shattered the German lines. The breakthrough was dramatic. Almost the entire western half of the German front in Normandy collapsed. On August 1st, American forces captured Avranches, the gateway city at the base of the Cotentin Peninsula, and General George Patton's Third Army went pouring south and east through the opening in a flood of armor and mechanized infantry. By August 8th, Le Mans, the former headquarters of the German 7th Army, had fallen to the Americans. Patton's columns were racing across open country, virtually unopposed, swinging in a great arc that was threatening to come up behind the entire German force in Normandy. At this point, every senior German commander on the Western Front understood what needed to happen. The army needed to pull back, retreat toward the Seine River, establish a new defensive line, preserve its fighting strength. The arithmetic was clear. The German position in Normandy was collapsing. A strategic withdrawal was the only rational option. Hitler ordered a counterattack. On August 7th, the German operation codenamed Lüttich, named for the German word for the Belgian city of Liège, the site of an early German victory in World War I, because the name was supposed to inspire, sent 4 panzer divisions crashing westward toward Mortagne, aimed at the coast at Avranches. The plan was audacious: cut through Patton's supply lines, split the American forces, reach the sea. Hitler believed this would reverse the entire campaign. His generals told him it was suicide. The armored divisions being pulled from the eastern sector of the front were the same divisions holding the line against British and Canadian pressure from the north. Strip them away and the northern front would collapse. Hitler ordered the attack anyway. The assault began in darkness and fog on the morning of August 7th, achieving some early surprise. The 2nd SS Panzer Division advanced rapidly, pushing American units back toward the town of Mortagne, where the U.S. 30th Infantry Division found itself under severe pressure. Hill 317, the high ground above Mortagne, became the center of a desperate battle as American defenders held on against German armor pushing through the valley below. But the fog lifted, and when the fog lifted, the Allied fighter bombers appeared. The Royal Air Force's Hawker Typhoons, rugged, powerful ground-attack aircraft armed with 8 unguided rockets and 4 20mm cannons, fell on the German columns with devastating effect. American P-47 Thunderbolts joined them. Allied air power had achieved something close to complete dominance of the skies over Normandy. By D-Day, the Luftwaffe could mount fewer than 100 sorties over the invasion area, while the Allies flew over 14,000 missions on June 6th alone. Now, with German armored columns concentrated on narrow roads in the open country around Mortain, those fighter bombers had the most valuable target set they would find in the entire campaign. The psychological effect was devastating. German crews abandoned vehicles, columns stalled, the attack lost momentum within 24 hours of launching. By August 13th, Operation Lüttich had failed completely. The Germans had lost approximately 120 tanks and assault guns. More critically, they had driven their best armored formations deep into the western end of the front, into a narrowing salient, at precisely the moment when American forces from the south and Canadian and Polish forces from the north were converging to seal them inside. General Omar Bradley, the 12th Army Group commander, saw it immediately. Looking at the map on August 8th, he reportedly said, "This is an opportunity that comes to a commander not more than once in a century. We're about to destroy an entire hostile army." He was not wrong. And somewhere inside that forming pocket was the 7th Army, commanded since late June by SS General Paul Hausser, who had taken over command after the death of General Friedrich Dollmann. Hausser was now standing in that same farmhouse near Trun, staring at that map, watching the gap between the Allied pincers shrink by the hour. The decision: orders, obedience, and the mathematics of survival. By August 14th, the mathematical reality confronting Paul Hausser was impossible to ignore. The gap between the Allied forces advancing from the north, Canadian and Polish, and the Americans pressing up from Argentan in the south measured 25 kilometers. That sounds like a lot, but both pincers were advancing daily. The Canadians, under General Harry Crerar, were moving southward at roughly 4 kilometers per day. The Americans, under Patton, were pushing north at around 5. If nothing changed, the gap would seal completely in 5 to 7 days. Inside that shrinking corridor, approximately 50,000 combat troops, the remnants of 9 divisions, 2 entire corps headquarters, hundreds of tanks, including irreplaceable Panthers, thousands of vehicles, field hospitals, artillery pieces, supply trains, the entire remaining fighting strength of German Army Group B in the west. To move all of that through 3 narrow escape roads, the N-158 through Trun, the D-116 through Chambois, and farm tracks between them, under constant Allied air attack and artillery fire, with bridges being bombed, with road junctions being shelled, with fighter bombers circling every 30 minutes, was an enormous logistical challenge even with an immediate start. And Hitler had not authorized an immediate start. On August 14th, at 7:30 in the evening, Hausser sent a formal withdrawal request to Field Marshal Walter Model, who had just replaced the disgraced Field Marshal von Kluge as commander of Army Group B. The message was clinical and urgent. The 7th Army's situation was critical, the gap was closing rapidly, current defensive lines were untenable under continuous air and artillery attack, withdrawal east of the Dives River was essential. Without authorization within 24 hours, Hausser wrote, preserving the Army's fighting strength becomes mathematically impossible. The response came that night, and it did not come from Model. Model had forwarded the request to Berlin. Hitler's answer was unambiguous. All units will hold current positions, prepare renewed counterattack toward Avranches, withdrawal not authorized, expect reinforcement. Hausser read those words carefully. Hitler was still ordering a counterattack westward toward the coast, the same coast that was now over 50 kilometers behind the Allied front line. The strategic picture in Berlin bore no relationship to the terrain outside the farmhouse window. It was as though the two realities occupied different dimensions entirely, and yet this was the order. And disobeying a direct order from Hitler carried consequences that were not theoretical. In the preceding years, German officers who had authorized unauthorized withdrawals had been relieved of command, court-martialed, and in some cases executed. The Nazi state did not forgive military failure, and it certainly did not forgive insubordination dressed as military judgment. Hausser made his decision on August 15th. He did not issue explicit retreat orders. He understood how the system worked, and he understood that the word retreat would be a red flag that could end his career and his life before he reached the Seine. Instead, he issued orders in the precise, careful language that every German officer would understand. Units were to adjust defensive positions eastward to consolidate the line. Heavy equipment that cannot be adequately defended was authorized for tactical repositioning. Unit commanders were instructed to conduct mobile rearguard operations to maintain corridor integrity and preserve force. Every officer who received those orders knew exactly what they meant. The 7th Army was moving east, carefully, with appropriate cover language in the written record, but moving east nonetheless. It was, in effect, the same calculation Hausser had made at Kharkov 18 months earlier, that partial preservation was infinitely better than total destruction, and that a general's first duty to his men was to ensure there were still men alive to be commanded tomorrow. He was gambling that by the time Hitler finally acknowledged reality, when the pocket sealed completely and resistance ended, enough of the 7th Army would have escaped to be worth saving. He was also gambling with his life. If the withdrawal was recognized for what it was before results could vindicate it, the consequences would be immediate and severe. On August 16th, Hitler finally authorized withdrawal. The message came at 1600 hours. All units withdraw east immediately. Preserve maximum combat strength. It was the order Hausser had been requesting for 4 days, but it came 5 days too late. The breakout, 3 roads through hell. The gap was now 18 kilometers wide and shrinking every hour. The 3 escape roads were not simply roads, they were killing grounds. Allied aircraft had turned the Norman countryside into something that observers described with words that seem almost too pale for the reality. The 2nd Tactical Air Force of the Royal Air Force was averaging 1,200 sorties per day over the pocket during the critical days of mid-August. Hawker Typhoons and RAF Spitfires attacked columns of vehicles continuously, hour after hour, while American P-47 Thunderbolts did the same in their sector. Artillery batteries that had established observation on the routes added their own weight of metal to the carnage. The roads were choked with burning vehicles, dead horses, abandoned artillery pieces, and men trying desperately to push forward past the wreckage of everyone who had tried before them. The escape was organized in layers. The 2nd SS Panzer Division was designated as a rear guard on the western flank, tasked with holding off the Allied advance and keeping the corridor open as long as possible. The 116th Panzer Division under General Gerhard von Schwerin held the southern approaches against American armor pushing up from Argentan. Between them, infantry divisions, the 276th, the 353rd, the 84th, and fragments of a dozen other units were supposed to flow east through the gap like water through a narrowing pipe. The pipe was narrowing faster than the water could flow. On August 16th, Polish forces captured Hill 262, a commanding ridge northeast of Chambois that overlooked the escape routes through the Trun-Chambois corridor. The 1st Polish Armored Division under General Stanislaw Maciek had swept around in a bold arc and seized what the Poles called the machuga, their word for a mace or bludgeon because the hill's map contour resembled that weapon. From Hill 262, Polish artillery had direct observation and direct fire on every single vehicle trying to move through the gap below. It was as though someone had stationed a gunner on a ridge above the only door and handed him an unlimited supply of ammunition. From August 17th onward, the reports coming into Hausser's command post described a steady, grinding catastrophe. The 353rd Infantry Division ran out of ammunition and surrendered. The 84th Infantry became trapped when bridges over the Dives River were destroyed, its men trapped between the river and the Allied advance. Officers were making independent decisions to yield, the only rational response when men have no ammunition, no route of escape, and nowhere left to go. Hausser noted each report and said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. The gap narrowed to 15 kilometers, then 12, then 8. By the evening of August 19th, Hausser had positioned himself personally near Chambois to observe the final evacuation. The gap was 3 kilometers wide. That meant fewer than 12,000 feet separated the Polish forces on Hill 262 from the American armor to the south. The corridor that had once stretched 25 kilometers, wide enough a week earlier to maneuver entire divisions, had been compressed to the width of a small medieval town and its surrounding fields. The scene was one of unrelenting violence. Tracer fire arced across the night sky. Artillery shells screamed in from multiple directions simultaneously. The three roads were clogged with men moving on foot, most of them having abandoned their vehicles kilometers behind because the fuel had run out, or the road was blocked by burning wreckage, or the bridge had been blown. The men were walking, stumbling, often in complete darkness, through a corridor that was closing tighter by the hour. Hausser made his final calculation at 11:15 in the evening of August 19th. He would lead his headquarters staff, approximately 2,000 men, including walking wounded, communication specialists, and senior staff officers, through the gap immediately. He would be the last commander to leave. At 12:30 in the morning on August 20th, Hausser led that column through Chambois. Polish machine gun fire came from Hill 262, raking the column. American artillery struck the roads behind and around them. Men fell. Others stepped around them and kept moving, because stopping meant dying, and moving meant maybe not dying, and that was the entire calculation available. Hausser was hit by shell fragments during the crossing. The shrapnel tore through his jaw, the same jaw that had already been wounded in the Bocage fighting earlier in the summer. The medical officers who later examined him would say the fragments had narrowly missed severing his carotid artery. He kept moving. By 2:15 in the morning, they were through. At 6 a.m. on August 20th, Canadian and Polish forces linked up at Chambois. The Falaise Pocket was sealed. What followed was the official counting of the catastrophe. Approximately 20,000 to 25,000 German soldiers had managed to escape the pocket, most of them on foot, most carrying only their personal weapons, most of them in no condition to fight anything for weeks. But approximately 50,000 remained inside the sealed pocket when the Allied lines joined. Of those, roughly 10,000 were killed in the final hours of the breakout and the subsequent Allied advance. The remaining 40,000 were taken prisoner, the largest single surrender of German troops in the Western Theater since Stalingrad. The material losses were staggering in a way that went beyond mere numbers. The Falaise Pocket consumed 344 tanks and assault guns, including Panthers and Panzer IVs, tanks that Germany's industrial system was already straining to produce and could not readily replace. It consumed 2,447 soft-skinned vehicles of every type: supply trucks, ammunition carriers, fuel tankers, medical vehicles, communication trucks. It consumed 252 artillery pieces, along with thousands of horses. The German army was still remarkably dependent on horses for logistics in 1944, killed in the roads and ditches in the Dives River itself. The 2nd SS Panzer Division in the 116th Panzer Division, which had entered Normandy with over 200 tanks between them, emerged from the pocket with fewer than 15. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth, the Hitler Jugend, had entered the Normandy campaign with 20,540 soldiers. It came out of the pocket with approximately 2,000, a 90% attrition rate. In a farmhouse 30 kilometers east of Falaise, Paul Hausser sat with his jaw aching from the shrapnel wounds and asked his chief of operations, Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf, the question that had been building in his mind since August 12th. If we had received authorization on August 12th, when I first requested it, how many men could we have saved? Von Gersdorf answered without hesitation. He'd been running the same calculation himself. If withdrawal had been authorized on August 12th, when the gap was still 25 kilometers wide and the roads relatively clear, the German forces could have moved with some organization. The tanks could have been driven out under their own power rather than abandoned. The divisional structures, the command relationships, the organizational identity of each unit, all of it could have been preserved. Von Gersdorf's estimate, 70,000 men, possibly more, with their equipment largely intact. Instead, approximately 20,000 escaped, without equipment, without organizational coherence, without the ability to fight effectively for weeks. The difference between those two numbers, 70,000 and 20,000, was 4 days. The 4 days between August 12th, when Hausser first requested authorization to withdraw, and August 16th, when Hitler finally granted it. 4 days during which the gap shrank from 25 kilometers to 18. 4 days during which the roads filled with burning wreckage that blocked the vehicles behind them. 4 days during which the bridges were bombed, the artillery established its killing grounds, the fighter bombers perfected their attack patterns on the roads below. It is worth pausing to appreciate the scope of what those 4 days meant strategically. The Falaise Pocket did not end the war in the West. Germany would fight on for 9 more months through the bitter autumn campaign, through the shock of the Ardennes offensive in December 1944, through the brutal fighting of early 1945. But the destruction of the German 7th Army and most of Army Group B at Falaise removed any realistic German ability to defend France. Paris fell on August 25th, 5 days after the pocket closed. By September 2nd, Allied forces had reached Belgium. The front that had taken 3 months to push 30 kilometers from the Normandy beaches covered 300 kilometers in less than 3 weeks once the pocket collapsed. Eisenhower, surveying the aftermath of the Falaise Pocket, reportedly said it was the greatest killing ground of the war. Walking through the narrow roads of the Chambois corridor after the fighting ended, Allied soldiers found a scene that left even combat-hardened veterans shaken. Burned and blasted vehicles stacked 3 deep in some places. Dead horses in the ditches and in the river, the wreckage of an entire army compressed into a few square kilometers of Norman farmland. Rommel himself, who had commanded in Normandy earlier in the summer before being wounded in an air attack on July 17th, had understood what was coming. He had written to Hitler in early July, warning that the strength of the Allied forces, their material superiority, their absolute command of the air, was something that German courage and tactical skill could not ultimately overcome. The situation demands, he wrote, a political decision. Hitler had dismissed the report. What the Falaise Pocket ultimately demonstrated was not simply a tactical or operational German defeat. It was a demonstration of what the combination of Allied air power, industrial capacity, and coordinated ground operations could do to even experienced, motivated enemy forces once the conditions were set correctly. The Allies were producing 100,000 tons of supplies per week through their logistics chain. They had essentially unlimited access to replacement aircraft, vehicles, ammunition, and men. The fighter bombers that were destroying German columns over the pocket could be replaced faster than the columns themselves. The Germans could not say the same. Every tank lost at Falaise was a tank that would not exist to defend the Rhine. Every experienced NCO killed on the roads to Chambois was a man whose knowledge and leadership could not be replaced by the increasingly young, inexperienced replacements being fed into German units in the autumn of 1944. Hausser himself survived the pocket, survived his wounds, and was eventually promoted and given command of Army Group G in early 1945. He surrendered to American forces in May 1945 and spent several years as a prisoner of war before being released in 1948. He lived until 1972, dying at the age of 92 in Ludwigsburg. In the late 1940s, as a prisoner working with the U.S. Army Historical Division, he co-authored an operational study of the 7th Army's experience in Normandy, a document later published in 2004 as Fighting the Breakout, the German Army in Normandy from Cobra to the Falaise Gap. It is, among other things, a general's attempt to explain to the historical record why he made the choices he made and what those choices cost. The judgment of history on those choices is more nuanced than a simple verdict of heroism or calculation. Hausser was, it is important to note, a member of the Waffen-SS, an organization responsible for serious war crimes. His post-war activities included leading a revisionist veterans organization that worked to rehabilitate the SS's reputation and deny its involvement in atrocities, historical work that mainstream historians have consistently rejected. The moral complexity of the man is real, and it is not separate from the military story. But the military story is also real and stands on its own terms. In August 1944, faced with an order that would have meant the total destruction of the force under his command, Paul Hausser did what he had done at Kharkov 18 months earlier. He looked at the order, looked at the map, did the mathematics, and chose the men. He issued coded withdrawal orders he knew would be insubordinate. He stayed with his soldiers until the last possible moment, until shell fragments were tearing through his jaw. He led the final column through the closing gap himself. And because of those decisions, approximately 20,000 men walked out of the Falaise Pocket alive, who, by the strict logic of Hitler's orders, should have been trapped and killed or captured there. It was not enough to save the 7th Army. It was not enough to change the course of the war. But it was 20,000 lives. And for a general standing in a farmhouse near Trun on August 16, 1944, looking at a map that showed 2 Allied armies closing around everything he commanded, saving 20,000 lives was the only victory that remained possible. That is, perhaps, what command ultimately demands of those who practice it honestly. Not the ability to win every battle, but the clarity to recognize when winning is no longer the question, and the courage to ask a different one instead. If you found this story as compelling as I do, please hit like and subscribe to the channel. There are so many of these stories from the Second World War, moments where individual human beings made decisions under impossible pressure, and the consequences rippled outward further than they could ever have imagined. We cover them all here on War Chronicles 1940, one story at a time.